ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Yesterday we began our discussion on some of the signs before the end of time. We began with that hadith, famous hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam, where the Prophet began to enumerate some of those signs before the end of time. And just as a brief recap about the things that we discussed yesterday, and inshallah we'll continue today, we spoke about the strangeness with regards to time, in that the Prophet said sallallahu alaihi wasallam, yataqarab al-zaman, that time will be brought close. And the ulama have speculated and thought about what the implications of that hadith are, or more precisely what the meaning of that hadith is. Some have spoken about the fact that there have been instrumental, fast changes in the world in our near modern history, or modern history from the last 50 or 60 years. There have been more changes in the world than there have been perhaps in the last 1,000 years. In the demographics of the world, in the makeup of the world, in the politicization of the world, in the establishing and creation of networks and network systems between peoples, in transport, in technology, in mass media. And the world is moving at a much faster pace than it ever moved before in our time. And we looked at that in terms of iconography and imagery yesterday. And others have said, in fact, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahmatullah alayhi, he said himself, قَدْ وُجِدَ فِي زَمَانِنَا هَذَا, that we're finding this increase or speeding up of time in our time. فَإِنَّنَا نَجِدْ في هذا الزمان, he says, because indeed we're finding in this time, in our time, مَا لَمْ نَكُنْ نَجِدْهُ فِي أَصْرِ الَّذِي قَبْلَ أَصْرِنَا هَذَا. We're finding the moving, the speeding up of time in his time, Ibn Hajar's time, what we didn't find in times before. And that is interesting that someone in his time would make that kind of a statement. It means that they were also feeling some strange things. It's a bit, in fact, like what Ali ibn Abi Talib said when he said in one of his couplets, radiyallahu anhu, may Allah be pleased with him, that there is a فَرَضٌ عَلَى النَّاسِ أَنْ يَتُوبُوا وَلَكِنْ تَرَكُ الذُّنُوبِ أَوْجَبْ وَالدَّهْرُ فِي صَرْفِهِ عَجِيبٌ وَلَكِنْ غَفْلَةُ النَّاسِ فِيهِ أَعْجَبْ. That there is a strangeness in the alternation of time, but the heedlessness of man in that, of course, is stranger than that itself. Others have spoken about the fact that this speeding up of time is something particular and specific to the time of the Mahdi and Eesa alayhi salam, min istilzad al-nas lil-aish wa tuwaffar al-amn wa ghalabat al-adl. The fact that in the time of Eesa alayhi salam, because there will be adl and there will be happiness and there will be peace, and all venom and ferociousness will be taken out of harmful animals and predators, and people will live in a lot of peace that they've never experienced before. So what they will do is that they will, and this is of course a human trait, a human phenomenon, in that they will shorten their days, ayyam al-rakha wa in talat. They will shorten their days of happiness, even though the days of happiness are long. وَتَطُولُ مُدَّةُ الشِّدَّةِ عَلَيْهِمْ وَإِنْ قَصُرَتْ. And they will lengthen their difficult and hard days, even though those difficult and hard days are short days. And everyone in fact experiences that. Whenever you have good days, it seems as if time is moving fast. But when you have a bad day, then time is dragging on, and things are slow, and you feel as if things are slow. I was just reading, subhanAllah, the case of Stephen Shepherd, who killed himself. He was in fact Britain's first example of what we call bullycide or homicide, suicide, bullycide. He was bullied in school and he killed himself in January 1965. And in his account, from the words of his sister, on one particular day he was allowed to go and collect strawberries from the strawberry fields, and his sister said, I wish I could have stopped I wish I could have stopped time for him. It's a bit like that, meaning he lived in so much unhappiness and unease in his entire short life, but for one day in his life he had the chance to pick strawberries in that village trip that he was allowed to go to, but it was short-lived, and it was a very short space of time, but his sister said, I wish I could have stopped time for him, because he was living in that moment of happiness. So some have speculated and thought perhaps this will be in the time of the Mahdi and Eesa alayhi salam. So we spoke about that, the fast moving of time. We also spoke about the increase in killing. From one hadith, that same hadith, يتقارب الزمان ويقبض العلم وتظهر الفتن ويلقى الشح ويكثر الحرج. Haraj, that there will be not only a speeding up of time and an increase in fitan of trials and tribulations and hardships upon people, and an increase in miserliness, but also an increase in killing. And so in another hadith, the Prophet swore, by him in whose hand is my soul, this world will not go until it comes upon the people a day, لا يدري القاتل فيما قتل ولا المقتول فيما قتل, until the one who is killed will not know why he has been killed, and the one who is killing will not know why he's doing the killing. And we spoke about that yesterday in light of a few things. Number one, the connection between the altitude and the attitude. So it's not just for specific people. In fact, anyone has this human capacity. The further we are away from human beings, the less empathy we have for them. And also, if there is a process of dehumanization, and we discussed that in light of the Afro-Americans when they were taken, snatched and enslaved in America and sold in slavery. We spoke about that in light of Vietnam and Japan, and also in light of what is happening now in Iraq and Afghanistan. These dehumanizing labels upon the people. Essentially in the world there are those, like Susan Sontag discusses in her book about the suffering of other people. There are some people in the world who are seen and others who are to be seen. There are some people in the world who see, like us, and others who are to be seen by us. And that is quite a remarkable way of looking at things, because it's so true. There are some people in the world who see and others are just to be seen, right? There are some who don't fit the image, who don't look the part. In fact, if you remember in Shakespeare's play in The Tempest, what do you have? You have Trinculo, who comes upon Caliban, and Caliban, who of course is a wizard of some sort, but he's dark-skinned. So when Trinculo first comes upon him, he sees this dark-skinned person and he thinks he's a dead Indian. He thinks he's a dead Indian. And so he says, I will take this person back to England and I will make people pay to see him. And he says, where people won't even give 1 shilling to save a lame beggar, they'd lay out 10 shillings to see a dead Indian. Because he's too dark-skinned. No one would ever want to have any dealings with him. The idea is he fits the mold of people who are to be seen. Just like you have proliferation of images of women in burqas, for example. It's as if they're dehumanized. They are not human like anybody else, but they're to be seen. Or you find people who look odd, or you find people who act in their views bizarrely, for example. Those kind of people are not people who feel and who also see the world, but those are the people who are to be seen by the world. And this in fact is an obvious process of dehumanization, but we sometimes miss the mark. But it's so true. Take anything like this, prejudice, discrimination, racism, and you will find this in the mold of it all. The idea is, and we began to discuss yesterday, but we had to rush because there were so many things to go through. I spoke briefly about what happened in 2007 with the Virginia Tech, and it is remarkable if you look at it just as an isolated example, because here you had that individual who killed these 30-odd people, and then he turned the gun upon himself and he killed himself. Now, what that was in American media, in fact, was a high point. It was called a high point in American media, because American media dedicated to each and every person who was killed quite a long segment in their reportage. So you learned, for example, who that one person was. You saw the person, you saw what his dreams were before he was killed, his hopes, his ambitions. You saw his mother weeping, you saw his siblings holding on to their mothers and their fathers. You even perhaps saw the burial. You see everything about the person to make that person a human being. He's humanized by way of that time that the media has allotted for him. And they give it for everyone, and it was long. Jeremy Scahill, in fact, says that in his analysis, if the American media gave that coverage to 1 day of what happens in Iraq on a daily basis, the war would end from his analysis. in the fact that people would immediately be drawn to humanize the people who so far are dehumanized. And the number of Muslims killed in Iraq on that day, particular day, was more than the number in Virginia Tech. But there are some people who see, and there are others who are to be seen. There are some images that are iconic images, and there are others that are not iconic. So you have in your mind, when you think of the word iconic, you have in your mind certain images. It's true. Like if you're from the West, you've lived in the West, and you know that one of the most iconic images of effect of warfare, when you open the history textbooks, you see that poor Vietnamese girl running, right? Okay, everyone's seen it. She's being skinned by American napalm. The poor Vietnamese girl is being skinned by American napalm. But the image is so iconic. Or you might think about the boy after the Anschluss, after the annexation of Austria, when the Nazis pointed the gun at his head and his mother's doing something, but we don't know exactly. She's trying to pull him away or trying to do something, but the Nazis just pointing the gun at his head. But the image is just iconic. Or you might remember 1994, the Bosnian Muslims behind the Amarska, barbed wire of Amarska concentration camp, right? You've seen the footage on ITN, 1994. Or it might be the Muslims from Guantanamo Bay, because the image is so iconic. And so there are some images that are iconic, that are unforgettable, because you've seen them so often. But each one of these people has a sibling, each one has a mother, each one has a father, each one has neighbors, relatives. So the ghulm does not exist in isolation, but it extends to all. When the Prophet said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, ittaqu ghulm fa inna ghulm dhulumatun yawm al-qiyamah, beware of ghulm, beware of injustice, because that is darknesses, plural, on the day of judgment. It isn't simply one, it is a lot. Ghulma, adam al-nur fi ma sha'nu yastanir. It is darknesses, it is the removal of light where light should exist, and it's ghulm. وَضْعُ شَيْءٍ فِي غَيْرِ مَوْضِعِهِ. It's putting a thing in a position where it should not be. It's both. But it's about how far we extend it. How far do we extend it? You know, it's an amazing thing, the way that the heart works and how we can show human empathy. But if we don't even know the narrative, we lose all the feelings. So from the perspective we discussed of the very national level of people like gangsters and people who have no regard, they have this kind of propensity to kill, or at least they think they have the human propensity only to kill. And so they go and they gun down people and they stab other people. You know, there was the case of I remember the case of Ben Kinzela. You wouldn't remember, no, perhaps I remember, but in England, you know, a boy who was stabbed for his cap, and his mother just bought his cap on his birthday. And I think it was his birthday day, if I remember. And he was wearing the cap, and so some thugs came along on their bikes and says, you know, with the knife, give us the cap. And he happily gave the cap, but they still stabbed him, right? And there are people who, you know, in one of the most iconic cases, inshallah, I'll try and be here on Thursday, because I will go through the narrative of Hussein ibn Ali, radiallahu ta'ala an, and his killing, and how that connects to what we call the bystander effect. But one of the most talked about cases is the case of a woman called Kitty Genovese in 1964-65. But the killer simply said, I killed her because I wanted to know what it felt like to kill a woman. Do you think the woman understood your logic? Understood the rationale? No. لا يدري القاتل فيما قتل ولا المقتول فيما قتل. The one who kills will not know why he's killing, and the one who is killed will not know why he has been killed. And also, from the perspective then of international crime, we take the hostile militaries of some countries who kill people indiscriminately. But because of the altitude, there is no feeling. They feel nothing. Read the reports. They feel absolutely nothing. They just go back to Starbucks to drink their coffee. But if you gave that person in the high altitude a knife, or if he was given a knife or a gun, and said, go back down to earth and don't kill 100 or 1,000 people, and along with that the wildlife and the cows and the sheep, and blow up the well, and blow up the school, and blow up the masjid and everything else. Forget all of that. Just take one weapon, go down back to earth, find one person and point the gun at him, and then see if you can do it. Now it's different. Because that person now, there is a frame within which there are three phases. The first phase is the person has to have the conscience to point the gun at someone else's face. The guy is innocent, hasn't done anything, and you will see the person begging for clemency and mercy. Please don't kill me because my mother is sick and needs my help. If the guy decides to pull the trigger, then the person falls down on the floor, and the decimation, the mess, the blood is now on that person, right? And that's the second thing. He has to deal with it. And number three, the person who is still on the floor begging for help, go and call an ambulance or do something, right? So to kind of pass through these three phases will make the person be able to do his crime. But from the altitude, press a button, and there's absolutely no feeling to that. And so we discussed that in light of those things. We discussed the fact that there will be apostasy. People will leave this religion. People will leave Islam. I mean, how could anyone do that? But people will leave Islam. يُصْبِحَ رَجُلٌ مُؤْمِنًا وَيُمْسِي كَافِرًا وَيُمْسِي مُؤْمِنًا وَيُصْبِحُ كَافِرًا. A man will be a mu'min, not just Muslim, he'll be a mu'min, believer in the morning, but a disbeliever by the evening, and a believer in the evening and a disbeliever by the morning. لا تقوم الساعة حتى تلحق قبائل من أمتي بالمشركين وحتى يعبدوا الأوثان أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. In one hadith he says the last hour will not come until some of my ummah will worship idols. When some of my nation will begin to worship idols. So we know that towards the end of time, one of the signs is that people will lose this religion. Not only will knowledge go, but people's iman, people's faith, people's belief will go. And these days, of course, it's for the most bizarre reasons. I mean, it's almost a fashion in some quarters, particularly in the West, for people to leave Islam, and then they write a book, and then they make money, and then they become famous. You know. So if you want to become famous, you leave Islam, so you can write a book, and then you can become famous. And this has become like a trend for people. Until some people are just like even discredited by the Western media themselves, because they know that something fishy is going on. How can you have a situation like this? Everyone claims to be an Islamist, for example, whatever that is. Everyone claims to be a militant and this, and they want to tell their stories and make money, right? But they don't even look the part. But you find this scenario, this situation exists. We also spoke about the imitation of the kuffar, the imitation of disbelievers. لَتَتَّبِعَنَّ سَنَنَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ شِبْرًا بِشِبْرٍ وَذِرَاءً بِذِرَاءٍ حَتَّى لَوْ دَخْلُوا جُحْنِ الضَّبِّ لَاتَّبَعْتُمُوهُمْ. He says you will follow the ways of those who came before you, handspan by handspan, cubit by cubit. This is coming after him. You will do this until if one of them went down the hole of a lizard, you would follow him down the hole of a lizard. And Sahaba, they said, Ya Rasulullah, do you mean the Jews and the Christians? قال فمن? He said, so who else will you follow then? Not only do we do that, my dear brothers, not only do we become like the carbon copies of people, but we in fact become the pseudo-images of people. We aspire for the same fabricated events as people do. We live within the same image as they do. Not only do we become the carbon copies of people, but we aspire for the same pseudo-images as they do. In fact, it's interesting, even in English etymology, the word image wasn't always the word image. The first word, in fact, was the word imitari. And from imitari, then you had imitati, imitatio, imago was the middle one, then you had image. And imitari means imitate. It means imitate. Right? Like in the Crusades times, the Christians, they had imitatio Christi. They thought they're imitating Christ by going to fight the Muslims in Jerusalem. But that's where image comes from. So it's imitate, and then it became image. But the irony is, of course, people are imitating what they see on the image. Isn't it? People imitate what they see on the image. They think the image is imitate, friendly, if you like. Or it's good to imitate the image, what you're seeing on the image. In fact, there are studies about India when the cinema first went to India, and think about how this has destroyed cultures, how people have lost their tradition, lost their cultures. You know, and the Arabs are included particularly in that. But I read one study about India, when the cinema first went to India, and so here you had these Indians who had their own culture and way of tradition of doing things, but immediately, and the guy tracks the thing, within a short space of time, they're aspiring to be American. They want to talk like Americans. They want to dress like Americans dress. They want to look like Americans look like. And that is simply based upon the image. Something that is not even real, it's fabricated. It has the gloss, it has the aesthetics, it has the brush. It has no reality in it. And a lot of people are like that. They're completely amazed by the things they see in the image. In fact, there's a book called Absolution by Fitzgerald. And you might remember him from The Great Gatsby. Did you ever read The Great Gatsby? By Scott Fitzgerald. It's a really telling book. And this was written, and the guy had some awareness, I guess, because this is like 1930s America. So he was anti-American dream. He believed it was an illusion. There was no such thing as the American dream. It was all fake, or facade, false. There was no reality in it. Right? It was simply a form of escapism. So after the Great Depression in 1930s in America, it gave people a hope, maybe I can become famous one day. A form of escapism. But he was against it, as were other people. But he wrote this book, The Great Gatsby, to tell the story of this person who can never make it and ends up killing himself. But he wrote another book called Absolution. In this book, it's a short book, Absolution. What happens is there's a Catholic priest, and the Catholic priest is in the confession box. Now, the one who comes in to confess is a young boy, who was about to confess his sins. But what happens is the priest himself confesses. The priest himself confesses to the boy in the confession box. And so the priest says to him, do you know that there are lights now as big as the stars? What happened? He's seen the world. There are lights now as big as the stars. He says to him, do you realize that? Do you realize that there are things in the world now that people never ever had before or couldn't ever see before? Allah says about Ibrahim alayhi salam, فَلَمَّا جَنَّ عَلَيْهِ اللَّيْلِ رَأَى كَوْكَبًا. When the night covered upon him, he saw a star. He saw a star. What did he say? قَالَ هَذَا رَبِّي. He said, this is my Lord. فَلَمَّا أَفَلْ. But when the star went down, قال, he said, لَا أُحِبُّ الْآفِلِينَ. I don't love the things that go down. He's teaching the people, teaching his people Tawheed, that the things that you see, even though subhanallah al-azim, these things are created by Allah. Yet people worshipped them, and perhaps people still worship them, but they're creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the sun and the star and the moon and the planets and the galaxies. In Absolution, the idea is, he says there are lights as big as the stars. They're not stars, they're just the artificial, but they're made, manufactured by people. So that's enough then, he loses his religion. He loses his faith in God. God can't exist if there are lights as big as the stars, right? But if you think about it, many people have that kind of understanding. The world is so amazing. I could travel from there to there in a space of a few hours. I can do in this and this. There's Scientology, right? They believe in science and the power of science. But all of these things are created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And are not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're created by Allah for our benefit. But people, they will lose themselves in their... Ibn Taymiyyah says, rahmatullah alayhi, that whenever you find people, whenever there is a situation, people, they remove themselves away from Islam by the amazing thing. Then know, he says, they have been touched by a fitna of the Dajjal. Because that is the plan of the way of the Dajjal. That is the package of the Dajjal, in that he will mislead people by the amazing, awe-inspiring things. He will point to the sky and the rain will fall, point to the earth and the plants and the trees will grow, by the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He's a test for us, for the ummah, for the world. But even before the Dajjal, you find people who have this amazement, and because of that they move away from Islam. We spoke about global deceit. يُصَدِّقُ فِيهَا الْكَاذِبُ وَيُكَذِّبُ فِيهَا الصَّادِقُ, when those who are truthful, وَيَأْتَمِنُ فِيهَا الْخَائِنُ وَيُخَوِّنُ فِيهَا الْأَمِينَ, those who are truthful would be regarded as untrustworthy, and those who are truthful will be regarded as untrustworthy, and vice versa, and the believers will be accepted as people of honesty, and vice versa. We spoke about that as well. And also knowledge and ignorance will prevail and knowledge will go, and there will be juhal, there will be ignorant people. In Sahih Bukhari, the hadith that Allah will not snatch knowledge away from people except by the death of the ulama, and told there remains ignorant people, and they will give fatwa, give Islamic rulings, but without knowledge, without understanding, without knowledge, and so they will mislead themselves and they will mislead other people. In one hadith, Al-Dhahabi says it's Hasan hadith, the hadith that before the end of time, لا يبقى من الإسلام إلا اسمه ولا يبقى من القرآن إلا رسمه, that nothing will remain of Islam except its name, and nothing will remain of the Quran except its letters. Its letters, or its ornamentation, or its design, decoration, its letters, that's it. And in another hadith, I think one is in the same hadith, and it's in another hadith about the fact that the masajid will be full, but they will be bereft of huda, of guidance. To continue then, my dear brothers, for today, one of the signs of the end of time is that the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, سيكون في آخر الزمان شرطة يغدون في غضب الله ويروحون في سخط الله فإياك أن تكون من بطانتهم. And in another hadith, صنفان من أهل النار لم أراهما, ناس معهم سياط كأذناب البقر يضربون بها الناس, أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. There will be a time of state oppression. We all know that. A time of state oppression, where he said there will be, towards the end of time, a police force, and the Prophet said they will earn the anger of Allah. The anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Prophet warned, so do not ever be from their supporters or to be from their allies. Don't ever choose the path of dhulam. Don't ever go on the side of injustice. And he also said, Sinfan, there are two types of people from the people of Jahannam, from the Nar. I have not seen those people, the Prophet said. One of them are the women who dress but they don't dress. They dress but they don't dress. Their bodies are visible from the clothing that they have. They're dressed but they're undressed. And the other are a people who have whips from the tails of cows. And they beat the people with those whips. And this is state oppression. These are tyrannies. And we see that, we've seen that for the last 40, 50 years and more than that in the Arab world. And it's still continuing, and we know what's happening, for example, in Syria. And it's still happening in Egypt. And has happened for decades. Tyrants, tyrannical rule, authoritative rule, dhulam, harshness, evil. And the Prophet prophesies this time when he says, I am the last Prophet and there will be after me Khulafa al-Rashideen, al-Mahdiyin, there will be rightly guided successors to me. In one hadith, there will be for a 30-year period. And then after that, there will be like a kingship. And that began from Muawiyah, may Allah be pleased with him, and his appointment of Yazid ibn Muawiyah, and it continued Banu Umayyah, then it went on. And then there will be Mulk al-Awd, there will be like a tyrannical period. Tyranny, dictatorship, harsh rule. And then you will return on Khilafah ala minhaj an-nubuwwah, then you will return on the Khilafah, to the Khilafah on the methodology of the Prophets. So you will have these four periods. You will have the prophethood of the Prophet ﷺ, then you will have the Khulafa Rashideen, and then you will have the monarchy, then you will have the tyranny, then you will have the Khilafah. And it's beautiful, in fact, that we can be in this last period. Because the expectation that the Muslim Ummah has, of course, is for this golden period to return. But it is a time that requires effort, and as we go along, inshallah, we will see that. One brother asked me yesterday, in fact, just as I finished my talk, he said, I get it, I understand there are signs before end of time and this is going to happen and everything, but are we not the best ummah? And it's a good question, because he said, are we not supposed to be the best ummah? So how can all these things happen to the Khairul Ummah, the best Ummah? And I thought, I said, you see, in the tafsir of this ayah, not everyone immediately held the belief this means the whole Ummah, because it's fi'l madi, it's kuntum, you were the best nation raised up for mankind. So people like Abdullah ibn Abbas and Sayyidina Umar himself, may Allah be pleased with them both, said this is for the people of Badr and people of Hudaybiyah. They were the best ummah raised up for mankind, meaning they passed the test. They did it. They sacrificed. As-sabiqun al-awwalun min al-muhajirin wal-ansar. They were the first of the people, and they had the most bravery and courage and sacrifice and everything. But then they say, وَإِنَّ أَوَاخِرِ هَذِهِ الْأُمَّةِ إِذَا أَقَامُوا الدِّينَ وَتَمَسَّكُوا بِهِ فَزَكَتْ أَعْمَالُهُمْ فِي ذَلِكَ الْوَقْتِ كَمَا زَكَتْ أَعْمَالَ أَوَائِلِهِمْ. But if the last portion of this ummah, if the last part of this ummah, if they establish their religion, if they establish the deen and they hold fast to the deen, then their actions will be good. Their actions will be great in those times like they were great for the people of the first time. Meaning you can have that, what they had in the beginning of time, that Allah favored them and Allah gave them this quality of being the best and the greatest of people, because they did what the ayah commands to do, which is commanding to the good and forbidding the evil and believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They had that about them and that made them great. But you don't simply say, we are the best ummah, but we're not commanding to the good, and nor are we forbidding the evil. Then what makes us great then? So it comes with shart, it comes with a condition to do that. But in any case, along the same discussion, when the companions came to the Prophet ﷺ and I think he was resting by a tree, and he had stones around his stomach, and they had stones around his stomach, but he had more stones around his stomach, tied around because of the pangs of hunger. And as they came, أَلَا تَسْتَنْصُرُوا لَنَا أَلَا تَدْعُوا لَنَا. Will you not make dua for us, Ya Rasulullah? Will you not make dua for us? How longer can we be like this, Ya Rasulullah? And he said to them that there was a people before you where a man would be brought and placed in a pit, and a saw would be brought and placed on his head and would cut him in two. And an iron comb would be brought and would separate his skin from his flesh, but none of that would make him waver in his religion. But none of that would make him waver in his religion. By him in whose hand is my soul, this affair of Islam will come to completion. حتى يسير راكب من صنعاء إلى حضرموت لا يخاف إلا الله والذئب على غنمه ولكنكم تستعجلون. This affair will come to completion until a rider can travel in peace and safety from Sana'a to Hadramaut, meaning complete safety. Even the fuqaha, they turn to this hadith to discuss, whether the woman would need a mahram or not in cases of peace that is established and safety and aman. That means utter peace, safety. A rider will travel from Sana'a to Hadramaut, not fearing anyone except Allah and the wolf upon his sheep. But you people are hasty, and he's teaching them. Have we done that much? Have we done that much? Have we made the effort? Have we bled? Have we sweated? Have we toiled? Have we labored? Where is our sa'i? وَأَلَّيْسَ لِلْإِنسَانِ إِلَّا مَا سَعَى وَأَنَّ سَعْيَهُ سَوْفَ يُرَى. A man will only have what he made effort for, and in the end it will be shown to him the fruits of his labor. One of the signs of the end of time, my dear brothers, is that he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, لا تقوم الساعة حتى يظهر الفحش والتفاحش وقضية الرحم. The last hour will not come until there will be an increase of shameful and indecency, and people will partake in that shameful deeds and indecency, and they will break the ties of kinship. They will break the ties of kinship, what Allah commanded to be joined. الذين ينقضون عهد الله من بعد ميثاقه ويقطعون ما أمر الله به أن يوصل ويفسدون في الأرض أولئك هم الخاسرون. Those who break or ratify the covenant after it was made, and they cut what Allah commanded to be joined. And the Mufassirin, they say, one of them is Silatul Arham, joining ties of kinship. One is Amra an yusal al-qawl bil-fi'l, that they were commanded to join speech with action, right? Meaning no hypocrisy. You do what you say. In one hadith, inna bayna yaday sa'a, qat'ul arham. Similar, before the last hour, the cutting of kinship, the breaking of kinship ties. La yadkhul al-jannah qat'ur rahim. Authentic hadith, the one who breaks or severs relations, cuts ties, will not enter paradise. In the Quran, فَهَلْ عَسَيْتُمْ إِن تَوَلَّيْتُمْ أَن تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَتُقَطِّعُوا أَرْحَامَكُمْ أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ لَعَنَهُمُ اللَّهُ فَأَصَمَّهُمْ وَأَعْمَى أَبْصَارَهُم. Those who, Allah says, is it that you will be like this, that when you are given power, authority, in تَوَلَّيْتُمْ, you are given your state, you are given authority, that you would make corruption and you would separate, you would cut the ties of kinship. Those are the ones Allah's la'na, Allah's curses upon them. And Allah causes them to become blind and to become deaf. Do they not ponder on the Quran? أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا, or are there locks upon their hearts? And that is something very important for us, my dear, especially the brothers who are from the West or from other countries, and your families are not here. It doesn't, of course, translate to you separating your ties or anything like that. But just think about, from a very basic level, the responsibility you have towards your parents if they're back home, or towards your relatives if they're back home. Do we forget that? Or are we so immersed in making our money and living the high life, if you're living the high life, as they call it, the high life, that we forget that. We forget our responsibilities towards those who, Allah says in the Quran, كَلَّا إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَيَطْغَى أَرَّآهُ اسْتَغْنَى. Indeed, man transgresses the limits when he sees himself independent, self-sufficient. You have some money in your pocket and you have a good job, whatever, you think, that's it, I'm a free man, independent of everyone else. But that is not the way that Allah made us. The example of Abu Hurairah is one of the most beautiful examples. Radiallahu ta'ala an, example of Abu Hurairah. And you know his story, of course, when he said, Ya Rasulullah, make dua for my mother because she's not becoming Muslim. And then Allah mahdi Abu Hurairah, oh Allah, guide the mother of Abu Hurairah. And he goes back home and his mother's become a Muslim. But there is a narration that says every time he would greet his mother, he would say, Assalamu alayki ya ummata wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Rahimakillah kama rabbaytani saghira. Peace be upon you, my dear mother, and Allah's mercy and blessings. And may Allah have mercy on you because of how you looked after me when I was young. And then she would say, Wa alayka assalam ya bunay wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Rahimakallah kama barartani kabira. And the peace be upon you and the mercy and the blessing, my dear son. And may Allah have mercy on you because of how you're looking after me now that I've become old. When the man came to Abdullah ibn Umar, حَمَلْتُ أُمِّي عَلَى رَقْبَةٍ مِّنْ خُرَسَانَ حَتَّى قَدَيْتُ إِلَى الْمَنَاسِكِ. This is for Hajj, for the manasik of the Hajj. I carried my mum on my back or on my shoulders for the Hajj. In that difficulty, أَتَرَانِي جَزَيْتُهَا, do you think I've paid her back? I understand she did wonderful things for me when I was young, but I did this thing for her, and it's for the Hajj, and it's a big thing like this. Have I done enough for her? And he said to him, وَلَا طَلْقَةً وَاحِدًا. Not even for one contraction have you paid your mother back. When Abdullah ibn Umar, if I remember, when he was in Medina, and he was on his camel, and he was wearing amama, and it was a hot day, and he was with his companions, and a man walked past, and he immediately got off his camel, took off his turban, put it on the man's head, and said, Irkab hadha, ride this, right? And the companions, his friends were just amazed. Why would you do something like that? What is the need? It's a hot day, you need your camel and you need this. He said, because indeed I heard the Prophet say, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, it is from abar al-bir, it is from the essence of piety, that you would show love and goodness to the friend of your father after your fathers passed away. This man was not the friend of Umar ibn Khattab, he was the son of the friend of Umar ibn Khattab. I mean, that is how far they extended it. To keep relations not only with their families, but the friends of their families and the sons of the friends of their families. But one of the signs of the end of time is that people will cut and break. I mean, we can simply speak about the world in terms of the world in which we live, the world of commercialization and the world of independence and the world of we don't need anyone else. There's a chapter in a book by Douglas Rushkoff called Bart Simpson, the Prince of Irreverence. The Prince of Irreverence. And I always mistake it in my mind like the Prince of Irrelevance. But you know that Bart is an anagram for brat. You know that? You know, Bart, when they had Simpsons, I don't know if it's still on, whatever, people used to watch it when they were kids. Adults watch it. Adults watch it. It's interesting, I was coming here, Qatar, Heathrow Airport in London, and I was just about to enter the plane, and there's a line of advertisements on the, on the walls before I got on the plane. And one of them had a picture of a Japanese man. You might have seen it. It's for HSBC Bank advertisement. It's a Japanese man and he's half bare-chested and he's very, very big, very huge, and he's reading a comic. And the message was, it said comics are more popular with Japanese adults than with American teenagers. And then it had HSBC Banking, discover a world of opportunity. What opportunity? Right? So you find this, right? So it's not just that people who are young would watch Bart Simpson, but even the elders are watching Bart Simpson. And this is telling, of course, of the age that we're living in. So we find this world. There are many of the minor signs before the end of time. There are some good books. Any good book of hadith, Sahih Muslim, Bukhari, has the Kitab al-Fitan, and you can go through them and learn about them. Or people like Ibn Kathir has his book on the end time events and fitan. One of the last of the minor signs, because it's not included in the major signs that come from the hadith, is the appearance of the Mahdi. Now, when it comes to the Mahdi, there are a lot of very, very weak narrations and fabricated narrations. And many began to proliferate and emerge during the conflict between the Umayyad and Abbasid dynasties. And you find very, very strange hadith, where even the people's al-Harith Mansur, people are named in the hadith, right? You know, he will be the Mahdi and this will be happening and so many very odd things. So it's, but there are some authentic hadith. There are some authentic things we know about the Mahdi, that he will be min walid Fatima, he will be from the descendants of the Prophet ﷺ, from the descendants of Fatima, from the line of Hassan radiyallahu ta'ala an, that he will have the name of the Prophet. His father's name will be the name of Abdullah, like the Prophet's father. He will resemble the Prophet, not in looks, but in character. Specific detail we have about him, he will resemble the Prophet, not in looks, but in character. And we have another authentic hadith that speaks about the Mahdi. When he will come out, he will rule with justice, adl, right? And one specific detail says that when the world is full of corruption, then Allah will send the Mahdi, or a man will come from my progeny, and he will rule with justice in a world situation where it had previously been filled with injustice. This is one specific detail concerning the Mahdi. There is also another hadith. This hadith, Shaykh al-Albani declared this hadith to be da'if, weak, but others have authenticated this tradition. The one that pertains to the three sons of the Khulafa who will want to seize the treasures, or seize your treasures, the hadith that says, but they will not be able to. and then a man will come from the west, I think west of Medina, west of Mecca, from Medina. I think one hadith in fact says Medina, and he will come and people would want to pledge allegiance to him, and he will refuse the first time, and the second time he will accept, and then between the Rukn and the Maqam of Ibrahim alayhi salam in the Tawaf area where the Kaaba is, he will accept, and then the Muslims will give the bay'ah authority to him, and he will live for 7 or 9, and in one tradition, or for 8 years, so from 7 to 8 to 9. So this is, and there's also now the other thing is these hadith pertaining to the black flags. Of course, there's been so much talk about this. One of the most people, you know, is it true about the black flags? Because there are a lot of hadith that speak about end of time, when the people with the black flags come to attack you, that will be the time when the Mahdi will come. Now, there is one authentic hadith that al-Dhahabi and al-Hakim both declare authentic, but also many of the scholars today declare authentic, although some they find weakness in this. But in any case, it says that this hadith about the 3 who will fight for your treasure, each of whom will be the son of a Khalifa, but it will be rendered to none of them. And then from the east, people with black flags will fight you like none before. Then from the east, people with black flags will fight you like none before. And then the Sahabi forgot some information, and he says that. Then I forgot some information, and then he remembered. Then he continued and said. Then the Prophet said, فَإِذَا رَأَيْتُمُوهُ فَبَايِعُوهُ وَلَوْ حَبًّا عَلَى الثَّلْجِ فَإِنَّهُ خَلِيفَةُ اللَّهِ الْمَهْدِي. And when you see them, those black flags, then go and crawl, even if you have to crawl on ice, go to give the bay'ah, because that will be the Khalifa of Allah, the Mahdi. So this hadith is one that pertains to the Mahdi. But the idea is that he will be a Khalifa, he will be a Muslim ruler towards the end of time, and he will rule with justice and unite the affairs of the Ummah. The Sahaba were talking on one occasion, and the Prophet asked them, وَمَا تَذَكَرُونَ, or كما قال, what are you talking about? And they said, we're talking about the Sa'ah, we're talking about the last hour. And the Prophet said, إِنَّهَا لَن تَقُومْ حَتَّى تَرَوْنَ قَبْلَ عَشْرَ آيَاتٍ. The last hour will not come until you see before it 10 signs. Now, this is the hadith, one of them that details the 10 major signs before the end of time. So he listed them, not in order however, but he listed the 10 major signs before the end of time. Ad-Dukhan, Dajjal, Dabba. A smoke, very thick, dark, black smoke towards the end of time. And the Dajjal, and his discussion inshallah will be tomorrow, so we will leave his discussing him and the many things that will happen with him and in that time when he appears inshallah for tomorrow. But he represents a major sign before the end of time. Dabba, and a creature who will come before the end of time. He will have the stature of a human, meaning with arms and with legs. So he will not be a creature as in a dog or a lion or anything like that. He will be in a human form, but he will be a beast, a creature, a beast, and he will brand people on their snouts, on their heads, in terms of their belief or their non-belief. Whether it's iman or whether it's kufr, whether the person is a mu'min or whether the person is a kafir. وَطْلُوءِ الشَّمْسِ مِنْ مَغْرِبِهَا, and the rising of the sun from the west, one of the last of the end of the signs of the end of time. And after, of course, we have the hadith. After that sign, there will be no repentance accepted from anybody ever, right? So before that time, the door of repentance is open and forgiveness is open. But after that major sign, a complete alteration in the universe, if you like. The sun would rise from the west. There is no chance of repentance anymore. وَنُزُولِ Eesa ibn Maryam, and the descent of Eesa alayhi salam, and inshallah we'll discuss him as well tomorrow because he has a very specific role to play in his return. Of course, we do not believe he was killed. وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ. He was not killed nor crucified, but an appearance was made like that. But he will return towards the end of time. وَيَأْجُوجُ وَمَأْجُوجُ, and the coming out of these two tribes of people, Ya'juj and Ma'juj. And again, these are human beings. These are not like strange looking, short people. I guess when we were kids, we had that image about them, that they were non-human and they were like dwarfs, if you like, who would, they have a propensity to kill. That's what the hadith tells us, right? They have this propensity to kill. And that's what they will do. They will try to kill everything and everyone on earth, and even try it with those they think are in the heavens, whatever, like this. But they will come out, and again they have a role pertaining to Eesa alayhi salam that we can inshallah discuss tomorrow. وَثَلَاثَةَ خُسُوفٍ خَصْفٌ بِالْمَشْرِقِ وَخَصْفٌ بِالْمَغْرِبِ وَخَصْفٌ بِجَزِيرَةِ الْعَرَبِ. And there will be 3 earthquakes or earth splits, one in the east and one in the west and one in the Arabian Peninsula. And then there will be a fire from Yemen that will gather the people for the judgment. And these are the 10 signs before the end. They have some private meeting amongst themselves, so I shouldn't go. But I still went in any case because I wanted to hear and learn what they're saying. وَحَفِظْتُ مِنْهُ أَرْبَعَ كَلِمَاتٍ. And on that occasion, I learned 4 things from the Prophet ﷺ, and I can count them for you now. أولاً, the first one, تَغْزُونَ جَزِيرَةَ الْعَرَبِ. You will make a raid on the Arabian Peninsula, and Allah will grant that to you. ثُمَّ فَارِسْ. Then you will make a raid in the Persian Empire, Persia, and Allah will grant that to you. ثُمَّ تَغْزُونَ الرُّومِ. Then you will make a raid in Rome, and Allah will grant that to you. ثُمَّ تَغْزُونَ الدَّجَّالِ. Then you will make a raid against the Dajjaal, and Allah will grant that to you. So this hadith specifically is an indication of things to come before. The most specific, of course, of that is the conquest of Rome. Not Constantinople, but Rome, the seat of Europe, the heart of Europe. Ahl al-Rum are Europeans, right? And this is a prophecy that came from the lips of Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Very interesting hadith. You find this in Sahih Muslim. When a man once came to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu ta'ala an, and this was in Kufa, and there was a red wind that was blowing in Kufa, and a man once came in this kind of panic mode. وَجَاءَتِ السَّاعَةِ جَاءَتِ السَّاعَةِ جَاءَتِ السَّاعَةِ. He's saying that the hour has come, the hour has come. And Ibn Mas'ud was like resting, and he gets up. And he says, no, the hour has not come until people no longer rejoice in the spoils, ghanima, in the spoils of war, and inheritance is not distributed to where it's supposed to be distributed. Then he pointed towards the east. And the man said, you mean Syria? He said, Syria. An army preparing against the Muslims, and the Muslims preparing against the army. He says, you mean the Rome? Yes. And so, in that encounter between the Romans and the Muslims will send forth one group, one contingent from amongst themselves, and they will make an oath that we will fight to the death. We will fight to the death until Allah blesses us with martyrdom, and they will fight ferociously against the Romans. But at the end of the day, no side has won, and the night will separate them from continuing the battle, and both sides will resume the next day. But they will be withdrawn. And then on the second day, another contingent will be deployed, and they will fight with the same intention and have the same resolve for death. But the same thing will happen. The night will separate them, and then they will go back. And they will be overwhelmed. They will not be able to continue. And then on the third day, the same thing will happen. فَإِذَا كَانَ يَوْمَ الرَّابِعِ نَهَدَ إِلَيْهِمْ بَقِيَّةُ أَهْلِ الْإِسْلَامِ. فَيَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ دَبَرْتَ عَلَيْهِمْ. But on the fourth day, they will send the remaining of their contingent, and Allah will decree that the enemy turns their backs. They will be defeated. The Muslims will have victory on that day, on the fourth day. And when they're in that state, the Prophet said, فَيَقْتُلُونَ مَقْتَلَةً لَمْ يُرَى مِثْلُهَا حَتَّى إِنَّ الطَّائِرَ لَيَمُرُّ بِجَنَبَاتِهِمْ فَمَا يُخَلِّفُهُمْ حَتَّى يَخِرَّ مَيْتًا. They will fight so ferociously that you've never seen a fighting like that ever before, until even the bird will fly past its flanks and will not survive. Even the bird will fly past its flanks of these armies and will not survive. And in that narration it says that if a person knows 100 people, no one except one will survive. So out of each who knows 100 people, only like one will survive. It'll be the Armageddon, as they call it. It'll be the epic. Malhamat al-Kubra. It will be the major battle between Islam and Kufr. And when they're in that state, وَبَيْنَهُمْ كَذَلِكَ, right? They're not rejoicing in the spoils of war. This is why it begins like this. Ibn Mas'ud is telling the man, people won't rejoice in the spoils of war, and it comes to this hadith. And so he says, do you think they would rejoice in the spoils of war if only 1 out of 100 they know has survived? They'll see these spoils, these treasures, but no one's rejoicing. وَبَيْنَمَا هُمْ كَذَلِكَ إِذْ سَمِعُوا بِبَأْسٍ هُوَ أَكْبَرُ مِنْ ذَلِكَ. And when they're in that state, they will hear of a news that is greater than that news. وَجَاءَهُمُ الصَّرِيخ. And a caller will come and pronounce and make a proclamation. إِنَّ الدَّجَّالَ قَدْ خَلَفَهُمْ فِي ذَرَارِيهِمْ. That Dajjal has come out to their families. فَيَرْفُضُونَ مَا فِي أَيْدِيهِمْ. And so they will drop what is in their hands. وَيَقْبَلُونَ وَيَبْعَثُونَ عَشْرَةَ فَوَارِسَ الطَّلِيئَةِ. They will drop what's in their hands, and they will send 10 knights, 10 horsemen, 10 knights to go and engage the Dajjal in this most critical time. The beautiful thing the Prophet said about them, إِنِّي لَأَعْرِفُ أَسْمَاءَهُمْ وَأَسْمَاءَ أَبَائِهِمْ. I know their names, and I know the names of their fathers. You should make dua to be one of them. And if you're not, then make dua Allah makes your children one of them. If not, make dua Allah makes your grandchildren one of them 10. Make someone from your progeny one of them 10. The Prophet said, I know their names and I know the names of their fathers. هُمْ خَيْرُ فَوَارِسْ إِنَّ ظَهْرَ الْأَرْضِ يَوْمَئِذٍ. They are the best knights on earth on that day. They are the best knights on earth on that day. What a privilege the Prophet gave to those people. SubhanAllah. We should inspire our children with these stories. There's too much of, it's actually pseudo-heroism. Susan Faludi has a chapter in her book called The Return of Superman. It's a long discussion. But it's all pseudo, it's all fictitious. People these days, they look for these superheroes only because their ideals are not there. That's the only reason. In the past, I think we discussed briefly yesterday, when you had heroes and who was recognized by his achievements, but the celebrity, which is the anti-hero, is now recognized by his trademark or his image, isn't it? Where the hero was known for his goodness and his good dealings with people, the celebrity is known for his knowingness, the fact that he's known. That simply makes him enough to be a celebrity. Doesn't have to do anything else except people need to know who I am. That's the idea. So this will happen towards the end of time. In one hadith now, my dear brothers, to put everything almost in perspective, the Prophet ﷺ said, hasten to do good deeds before 6 things happen to you. The rising of the sun from the west, the smoke, the Dajjal, the beast, the death of one of you, or the general turmoil. Just think. Hasten to do good deeds before 6 things happen to you. The beast, the smoke, the rising of the sun from the west, the Dajjal, the death of one of you. That is enough as an alam. That is enough as a sign for you, or the general turmoil. And another similar hadith, when a Bedouin once came to him, Sahih Bukhari's hadith, and he said to him, when is the hour? Like, Mata as-sa'a, when is the last hour? Yesterday we discussed another hadith when a man asked, when is the last hour? And the Prophet said to him, وَمَا أَعْدَدْتَ لَهَا, what have you prepared for the last hour? In this hadith, the Bedouin comes and he says, when is the last hour? And the Prophet pointed to a young boy, and says, look, if this young boy grows up, and he becomes old, and he becomes decrepit, your hour would already have come to you. Look what he's teaching them. We are not apocalyptic people. The Christians have that propensity, becoming messianic almost. We are not like that, in fact. And there's some beautiful hadith, but I'm saving them inshallah for tomorrow, about these kind of things, about being non-apocalyptic, non-messianic, and just doing the job that Allah gave you to do. But that is the essence. During the talk I mentioned that poem of Ali ibn Abi Talib radiyallahu an, فَرَضٌ عَلَى النَّاسِ أَنْ يَتُوبُوا وَلَكِنْ تَرْكُ الذُّنُوبِ أَوْجَبْ, that it is a must upon the people to ask Allah for repentance and forgiveness, but it is more of an obligation for them to leave sins. وَالدَّهْرُ فِي صَرْفِهِ عَجِيبٌ, and time or the errors in their changing is ajib, it's strange. وَلَكِنْ غَفْلَةُ النَّاسِ فِيهِ أَعْجَبْ, but the heedlessness of man during that time is even more strange. And everything that you're hoping for is qareeb, but death is aqrab, but death is closer to you. When the companions came, and usually it's Abu Dharr al-Ghifaari, he's amazing. May Allah be pleased with him. He's a champion, obviously. Amazing companion. Because in a lot of these hadith, if you check who is asking the question about what is the best thing to do and what is the best, it's usually Abu Dharr. He's asking. That means he wants to be the best. Why is he asking the question then? And so he asks, Ya Rasulullah, Ayyul mu'minina akyas, who is the wisest person? The most sagacious and the wisest person. And to that the Prophet replied, Sallallahu أكثرهم للموت ذكرا وأشدهم استعدادا له, the one who remembers death the most and the one who prepares for death the most is the wisest person. And this is Qiyamah al-Sughra, like we mentioned, this is our last day in any case. This is our last hour. And the hadith, the one we discussed yesterday, Badr bil a'mal, be quick towards good deeds because fitna will cover you. And these two we've just mentioned right now, hasten to do good deeds. Or the ones, I just mentioned, this one, before 6 things happen to you. The Prophet is telling us what to do. Be quick in doing your good deeds because these things are about to happen to you. Death that is enough of a reminder for us. Like the Salaf, they would say, from the blessings in dunya, then Islam is sufficient as a blessing from you. And from the lessons you should learn, then death is enough to teach you. When Nabi Sallam was by the grave and his companions were with him, and the Prophet said, ركعتان خفيفتان مما تحقرون وتنفلون يزيدهما في عمله أحب إليه من بقية دنياكم أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. 2 rak'ats, 2 units of prayer, خفيفة, meaning they're very light, which you belittle. Tanaffalun, they're just nawafil, they're just voluntary. You belittle them. They would increase this person in his grave, are more beloved to him than what remains of your entire dunya. See, if that person had a chance to be in your place, it would not be to be or not to be. It wouldn't be to be or not to be. Should I pray? Should I pray? Should I pray? Should I pray? Subhanallah, hasten to do good deeds. I'll just pray. It's light, it's easy. And even that, in its lightness, and even in its simplicity, and even if it's quick, it's quite fast, 2 units of prayer, but they would simply increase the dead person in his grave, are more beloved to him than what remains of your entire dunya. If he was in your place. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us in these end times. That Allah gives us tawfiq. One of the hadith, Sahih Muslim, al-ibadatu fil haraj ka hijratin ilay. Worshipping in the time of killing is like migrating to me. Worship in the time of killing, this is a time of killing. It's been a time of killing. You know, the numbers we discussed are indescribable. We don't think too much but if you think about it, Hiroshima, how much? 80,000. World War II, how much was it? 50 million people lost their lives. And out of them, 67 or 61% was civilians. We're dealing with millions killed. And they use these euphemisms to keep us all at bay. It's all good. This is a world, it's euphemistically framed. So they call them smart bombs. But is there a smartness in the bomb? Like Martin Luther King said, you know, we have guided missiles, but we've misguided men. Even Hitler had it. Hitler had a thing called Charitable Foundation for Institutional Care. You couldn't think of a better one even if you tried hard. Charitable foundation. What is a charitable foundation for institutional care? You think this guy you were given the Nobel Peace Prize for even thinking of a name like that. But it was his institution for killing off the mentally handicapped and the diseased and the partially insane. You know, when the British went to Northern Ireland, they called their interrogations something like moderate. They called their torture intensive interrogations. The Israelis, they call it now against the Palestinians moderate physical pressure. And you think, is it really moderate physical pressure? It's far worse than that. So they use these euphemisms, right, to keep us all, you know, we're desensitized to the suffering. So when the Prophet described it as a time of killing, it is a time of killing. An indiscriminate killing. And mass murder. On an unimaginable scale. And it's happening now in Afghanistan, it's happening now in Iraq. And it's happening in other countries. And it happens with the Muslims, it happens with the Japanese. We discussed Hamburg, isn't it, yesterday, in Tokyo, the first time they had, at least on record, the firestorms that were created. But we become desensitized because other things are keeping us like that. We ask Allah for tawfiq. May we be people of ibadah, people of worship in these times. One of the signs before the end of time, the Prophet said there will come a time where the as-sabir ala dini kal-qabid ala al-jamr. When the one who's holding on to his faith, holding on to his religion, will be like the one who is holding on to hot coal. Like the one holding on to hot coal. Will be extremely difficult for people to be Muslims in those times or to practice their religion sincerely and correctly in those difficult times. And this is true for many people in many parts of the world today. We always remember the Muslims in China during Ramadan. Right? You might think about the Muslims during the Spanish Inquisition, who could not fast, could not pray, could not make ghusl, could not make wudu, could not make adhan, could not speak Arabic, could not read Arabic, could not do nothing, zero, anything that even resembled anything Islamic. They would watch, the Christians would watch the Muslims walking the narrow streets of Andalus in Spain to see if they're wiping their hands on the walls because they know about the ruling of tayammum.
Because they think maybe, you're using this to make tayammum. They couldn't do anything. So this happens, it has happened, and it happens even today, and may continue to happen, even in a worse situation. But may Allah protect us, and may Allah make us people of sacrifice, and people of effort, and people of worship in these times, and may Allah save us from the fitan, from the trials and temptations and difficulties in this last phase of humanity almost, this last phase, this last period before the end of time. May Allah send His peace and blessings upon Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa ashabihi wa sallam, walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Jazakumullah khair.